Everyone hits a bump in the road. What do you do with it? Be inspired as we explore the ways people experience, navigate, and manage the ups and downs and twists and turns in this road trip called life. Welcome to another episode of Bump in the Road. The basic podcast is always free. We also have a premium subscription called Bump 2 that lets you listen in on extended behind-the-scenes conversations with our guests. Check it out at www.bumpintheroad.us. Doug Stoddard is known as the habit breaker. He is thoughtful, insightful, and most of all knowledgeable about human behavior. He helps business people recognize their habits and rewire their neurocircuitry. The key is developing a greater personal, psychological, and social awareness and the willingness to make conscious choices. Please welcome Doug Stoddard to Bump in the Road. Doug, welcome to Bump in the Road. If you would, tell us your story.
Yes, I was involved with sales for many, many years, and then my wife and I got involved with a company in regards to nutrition and my health, and just did very, very well. We had 6 children at the time and just thought everything was great. And then some issues with the company we were working with that were ownership was caught embezzling, and they had a lot of lawsuits against them. And it took them down. It took us down. We lost our employees. And at that time, and we went into bankruptcy. And I started hearing so much negative talk in my head. I found myself comparing myself a lot of judgment, needing to be right. And I actually felt like a victim to my circumstances. And so that went on for 9 years, trying to figure out how to recreate success. And while struggling with all these, what I call habits of thinking inside of me, and not understanding how I saw the world and how that impacted how I moved throughout my day. And so that took me into a lot of neuroscience, which I really love, to understand what was going on in Stoddard's head, what was driving my behaviors, what was driving my emotions, and how I saw life and my confidence. So I'm a habit breaker expert, and but that's what drove it into. And it's interesting how our circumstances can drive us into things that we're really supposed to be doing.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think that until we understand ourselves, or at least start to understand ourselves, how can we understand anybody else?
Well, that's true. Very true.
So we were going to talk a little bit about the idea of victimhood today, which is something I think we've all wrestled with at some point.
Oh, yeah. Could I share what I believe about that?
Please. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm going to tie in the neuroscience aspect of it, because until we can really understand that, we just keep dealing with the same issues over and over and over again, and that's not fun. I don't like that. So, what I believe is that 90% of all, for example, business challenges are simply people's personal problems in disguise. Okay, and I'm talking about their emotions and their behaviors and what they say and their attitudes, all those things that show up in business, and they also show up at home. Okay, and so these are the problems that we deal with at home and in business. And so what I also believe is that what drives these behaviors, these attitudes, emotions, all these things are what we call habits of thinking. And there are external habits, right, that wake up and you make your bed first thing in the morning. Those are doing habits. I'm talking about thinking habits. And they get stored, these habits of thinking have come over a period of time of how we react to things. And the brain then takes that and it stores it in a neural pathway in your brain. And so when we get external stimulus or messaging from the outside, we think it goes from here, like when I'm talking to you right now, we think it's going from up here, the conscious, to the conscious side. Yeah. And that's not what science has shown it. It comes through the lower part of your brain, the amygdala. And as this information is coming up through these neural pathways, it's like an old pinball machine. It will hit one of these neural pathways or one of these habits of thinking that are stored. Bing, it lights up, it opens up the door, and it starts dumping in what I call a subconscious response. And it's a memorized subconscious response. So you pretty much get the same deal every time to some degree. Okay. And so the response includes emotions. You know, you've been triggered when you have these emotions, all of a sudden they come up. And then after 90 seconds, it then turns into sabotaging thoughts about ourselves, about other people, about situations. And then these two things together, Pat, will then create a labeling, a false labeling, an identity that we then will tend to put on ourselves, on other people, and on situations. Those things then over time create a memorized personality that tends to show up in those moments. Why does she act that way? You know, why does he do this? You know,
Oh, it makes total sense, and we've all been there.
Yeah, we deal with it all the time, and we're human. It's biology. That's what it is. So then the next thing that happens is those things combined then drives our behaviors. And that in turn drives our outcome. So the other thing I believe is this, and I've learned, is that we can only put language around or identify 10% of these habits of thinking. The other 90%, we just live in them. We react to them. We label them. We become victim to them. We become, we just live in it. That's why we feel so much frustration, overwhelm at times, and all these kinds of things, because the subconscious is in control and we're not even aware of it. And that's not fun, okay? So we can only recognize, like I said, 10% of it. So now what you have going on here is that people go through their day, they have external things happen, and then subconsciously, one of the habits of thinking is to blame the external things that are happening. Oh, it's because she didn't do her project. Then that's why I couldn't do my job. Or, he's really rotten. He doesn't understand me. He doesn't listen to me. And so it's his fault. It's really interesting. Can I share an example of this?
Yeah, please.
Okay. I was talking to a guy, he successful. He doesn't own a business, but he works within a business. He's quite successful, and has a large family, and they're very active in their church and community. And one of his measurements, we can measure these habits of thinking, and one of them was self-sacrificing. Now, a lot of people are self-sacrificing. It's amazing how many are showing up, but it shows up in the question is, how are they sacrificing? Well, this guy, it was really fascinating because he had some self-worth-ish dialogue going on about himself. So his wife would ask him, "Oh man, I need some help." And he'd been working all day. She'd been homeschooling and doing all this stuff. And he'd say, "Oh yeah, I'll do these 5 things." and it's 8 o'clock at night. And the first one is to put the kids to bed, right? Because they have younger kids. And he falls asleep. And next morning, she wakes up and there's still chaos in the kitchen. And he was supposed to take care of it. And so she says something, he becomes defensive, and he looks at himself as a victim because doesn't she appreciate the effort I do put in? Do you see how
Makes
that
total
kind of
sense.
works? And
Oh,
it's all
absolutely.
subconscious. What? Excuse me?
Yeah, absolutely. And it is subconscious. I had an interesting experience recently where somebody was very accusatory about something. And then afterwards they come back and say, oh, we value you so much. And this was a pattern that happened again and again. I've seen it. Numerous other people around in this situation had seen the exact same pattern. And it really was troublesome because it just pulled the rug right out from underneath you. And I haven't talked to this person because I'm not sure that he would be receptive to the idea that he has a pattern of behavior that is really hurting him.
He probably doesn't.
I think it's totally unconscious because he's a nice person. He's a good person. He doesn't realize he's doing this.
Yeah. Well, that's what I'm talking about. We can only identify 10% of what's going on. These, in fact, I was talking recently with a man who said, my nemesis in life is my weight. I have struggled with 40 years or 50 years. And anyway, he said, finally, I got tired of it. And I began to listen to what was the dialogue, because he understands the neuroscience, but he couldn't hear it about his weight. And so he just kept falling back into the same old problem. And so he said, I finally began to break it down. And he said, what am I hearing about myself related to exercise, to nutrition, to sleep? These identities, right? What are my identities around these different areas, and what's the dialogue that goes on? And he says, as I began to intentionally focus on those areas to try and hear it, he says, after about 3 weeks of doing this, he says, oh my goodness, I can hear what I've been telling myself for the last 30 years.
What had he been telling himself?
Oh, just the dialogue about exercise.
Yeah.
Yeah, for example, I hate it. It's about, I can't do it. It's painful. Whatever that dialogue. And about nutrition, I don't know all the dialogues that he had, but what was fascinating to me is that even though it was in his head, the thoughts that were there and the emotions involved with it, and he didn't recognize it. And he said, since I've recognized it and we have action steps to help people, then he says, I've lost 18 pounds in the last 3 weeks. And I haven't, because I can hear when it's talking to me about it's time to binge eat, right? You sit down, watch Netflix, and you have a bag of chips. He says, I can finally hear how it was talking to me and what was driving it. And until we can become aware of it, then the challenge is that we just have to keep dealing with it.
How do you help people become aware of these internal dialogues?
Well, that's a great question. For me personally, first of all, you have to be able to observe. And many of us are in such a fast-paced environment with so many things to do. To observe, we just don't take the time. And so journaling is really helpful with this. But personally, where I help people so much and get so much clarity quickly is we have a tool that's 100% accurate that it's based on what we call high levels of axiological mathematics. So this is not a personality test. Okay. This this is based on high levels of math. You can't fool it, 100% accurate. But what it does, Pat, is it actually forces the subconscious to reveal the 90% of the habits of thinking that's stored in there that we're not aware of. And it also forces it to reveal the language of how it's speaking to us.
Oh, wow.
And so, with that information, uh, then you can begin to focus in and begin to get clarity and ask questions that I had a guy the other day that just said, "Oh my goodness." He says, "That's exactly what is going on." And he couldn't have told me that before.
I think
But
awareness is the first step. Do you ever recommend any sort of meditation or anything like that for your clients?
oh, absolutely. It's I even am doing that myself uh, because I believe that in order to not fall into a victim mindset, really about my energy or uh, about working out or I have too many projects. I could fall into the victim as blaming that, uh, being a victim and blaming other things. But what I've learned is that meditation is critical throughout the day. It doesn't have to be long. I do believe this is that our brain only has so much mental bandwidth and emotional bandwidth. And so we're always depleting it. And even though we may say, man, I've still got a lot of energy and I still want to work forward, and you've already been working on something for an hour, you're going to find a diminishing return if you don't learn how to rest and renew. And I'll do it in multiple ways. My office is in the basement of our home, and so I'll run upstairs. I'll get a drink of water. Sometimes I'll do jumping jacks. Other times I'll go out for a walk. Um, anyway, yeah. But
No,
meditation, journaling.
I think you bring up a really interesting and important point, and that is that our brains need rest. And meditation gives you that space, that place of rest. And I think that until you can experience the beautiful silence of a quiet mind, you can't begin to observe your thoughts. And observing your thoughts is the key piece to correcting them or
Yeah,
taking charge of them.
absolutely, absolutely. It's I work with a lot of people who um, one of their habits of thinking is not a negative at all, but their brain just never shuts down. You ever run into people like that, Pat?
Yeah, I have one friend. She's a wonderful person, but she just talks incessantly about nothing. I would drive myself crazy.
Yeah. Well, there's that side of it, and others their brain's always working on problems, solutions. They go to bed and they're staring at the ceiling, and they wake up and their brain's racing off, going off to the races again. And that's one of the key things that I work with them on is how to help your brain become still and quiet. And you can do that. You absolutely can do that. And but meditation is a critical part. And when you're in that space, then you can begin to hear and just be still. But yeah, that's a powerful concept of meditation and being still, rest
Well,
and
I think
renew.
it goes beyond just the period of meditating. I think that you start to form new neural pathways when you meditate, and you experience. Meditation is partly experiential. You experience this deep peace and silence. And once you've experienced that, it's part of you. So as you go about your daily life, you now know that this deep peace exists all the time, no matter what, and you can access it. So all of a sudden, road rage is a thing of the past.
Hmm.
Being impatient, the choice to be impatient is a choice, and you can see that it's a choice, and you can pull back and be patient with the person ahead of you who has 200 things in their shopping cart.
Hmm. So true. So true. And you've described the words or used the word impatient, right? Or
Mm-hmm.
road rage or anger, those types of things. See, those are all driven by habits of thinking, needing to be right, comparison. Um,
Judgment.
excuse me?
Judgment.
Judgment. Absolutely.
And that's a hard
Other,
one in this world.
yeah, boy, aren't a lot of division, isn't there?
Well, I just think that we live in kind of a hierarchical material world. What car do you drive? What neighborhood do you live in? What do you wear? And all those things become elements of potentially elements of judgment, and they don't serve us in any way, and they're meaningless, frankly.
Yeah, and it's judgment to external things, or is it also judgment to intrinsic yourself?
Oh, I think it goes to both. Oh gosh, my car's not as nice as my neighbor's, or my house isn't as expensive as so and so's. I think it goes both ways, but I think when you look at judgment, you have control over that. Do you choose a judgmental route, or do you choose to look past that, for something deeper?
You are right, and it's but until we can see it and hear it, we we always have choice. Absolutely. When it comes to habits of thinking, though, I say the subconscious mind works at the speed of light, and
Oh,
you
it
can be.
does.
Excuse me.
It does. If you find yourself, I think, emotionally reacting to something, you have to stop and ask where that pattern of reaction comes from.
Yeah, absolutely. That, but that takes practice, doesn't it?
It takes practice, it takes honesty. It can be very intimidating because it forces you to look at yourself and your own history and see where your patterns come from. But until you see them, you can't evolve away from them or evolve into something better.
That's right. So what you just said um, reminded me of what is self development. What does that really mean? Because what you're describing here is living in the world we live in. It's going to require more than just learning the skill sets of how to run a computer or do a podcast. It's right.
Well, one hopes, but
but those are very helpful. But the number one skill set that's going to be required to lead anybody, whether it's in business, a family, community, a church, whatever it may be, the number one skill set is your emotional intelligence. That's what's required in the 21st century. And so this is really critical. Self-development to me is when you can actually get to the neural pathway level, get clarity on what's getting triggered, why it's getting triggered, and then be able to, as you say, step back and observe it, and then know what to do to shift it. Because we are human, and because of that, we can actually force the subconscious to create a new neural pathway, and that's more healthy for us, that helps us to see things in ourselves more clearly, and in the process, it clips off the old neural pathway. And
how
to
does that
me,
ha- how does that work? First, creating the new neural pathway, and then replacing the old one.
well, I don't understand all of it, but basically what's going on is as the brain looks at repetition and it looks at how we react to things, and So when we think about doing something, for example, the brain will go to its memory banks and it will say, is there anything in my memory banks that's going to tell me if this is safe and if it's predictable? And if the memory bank says, oh, we've tried this before and it didn't go well, then we get all this pushback, right? It's excuses, reasons why we can't do it. We can even fall into becoming a victim at that point, a victim to our past experiences. And so, or if it's something totally new and there's no information there, then the brain, we call it our comfort zone, then it pushes back. Don't try it. So when we dare to step out just beyond the comfort zone and we start doing something new, Mel Robbins said it so well, Pat. She called, in my opinion, she calls it, or she said, what is the definition of confidence? And her definition just resonated with me. It's the willingness to try. And what she meant by that, based on science, is that we try something, we step out and we try something and we fail, or we don't do it perfectly or whatever, or we feel like we failed. But the brain records everything that it learned when you were trying. And so if we'll step out again and try it again, then the brain, we may still get pushed back by the brain because it doesn't have enough information, but then it goes in, it keeps gathering the information that it learns. And that process goes on until it has enough information. Then it takes it out of the conscious. You have to do that consciously. It takes it into the subconscious. And you can drive. It's like learning how to drive. The first 6 months, you're in the conscious focus. When to turn, look out for that car, when to stop, all that kind of stuff. But now you can drive down the road, Pat, go 100 miles, and you're thinking about something, and you don't even remember where you've been. And so in this process of trying things, your brain's gathering information, and as it's doing that and how you respond to it, it's creating a new neural pathway. And the neural pathway is designed to transport information, impulses, etc. And so there are good habits of thinking. We have many of them. We can measure those too. The challenge is that the sabotaging habits of thinking are so loud in our heads and in our emotions and in our labeling that it drowns out our healthy habits of thinking that we could be using to offset these other habits of thinking.
Yeah, no, I think we've all been there with that. I think that the willingness to step outside your comfort zone is a key element of living a good life.
Tell me more about that. I love that statement.
Otherwise, you're just repeating things again and again, and you're shying away from new experiences, new learning. You're just in your rut doing the same thing. But when you step outside your rut, outside your comfort zone, now it demands that you be present, that you learn, that you take chances. And I think that element of life is what makes life worthwhile. Eric Weinmayer tells the story of, he divides the world roughly into 3 groups. And the groups are fluid. You can move between them, okay? And we've all been in each of these groups. The first group are quitters. They're self-evident. The next group are campers. They are people who want the status quo at all costs. Now, in all fairness to campers, they may be so beat up by life that they don't want to stick their head outside the foxhole anymore. Okay? Then very few people are climbers. And I personally am fascinated by what it takes to go from being a camper to a climber, because I think that in climbing, that's where you live a realized life.
Yeah, that's totally agree with that. And we could possibly be campers in one area of our life and climbers in another.
Absolutely. And we can be quitters sometimes too. I mean, and you can't be a climber all the time. It would be too exhausting. But the point is that the essence of a climber is somebody who is, I liken it to the Buddhist notion of a beginner's mind, who's willing to be open and to learn and to take those chances and to do it again and again, even when the results may not be great.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't know, I may have shared this with you another time, but um, I look at the true definition of what mediocre means. And mediocre today, if I were saying, oh, Pat, when it comes to flying, you're just mediocre. uh, I don't know what you would say to that, but I imagine it could trigger some emotions.
Well, I
And
could probably answer that from a few different perspectives, actually.
okay, but mediocre today represents that. You're just average or less than average. You're a bump on the log. You're not making a difference. And everybody has their own definition of what it means, but it's more of a negative connotation. But before the year 1640, the definition of mediocre simply meant halfway up your mountain. That's what it
Oh, I
meant.
like that.
Yeah, and when we're climbing mountains, which means we we've been camping at the base of the mountain, right? And we're starting to climb. We make this choice that we're going to change something in our life. We're going to try something new. We're going to move to a different area, or I'm going to learn how to do podcasts, or whatever it may be. There will be a mountain that we're climbing, and so what's interesting when you get up to a certain point on the mountain, there's a couple things that happen. You can always look behind you and see the path that you've come up. And the other thing is that you can usually see another mountain. So it's never ending. So halfway up the mountain, I've learned and mediocre is there's two things that are so helpful with this. The first one is to recognize whenever we are climbing a mountain and we get out of our comfort zone, we're becoming climbers. There always seems to be a step of we take one or two steps forward and we may feel, hey, that was pretty good or whatever. But I've also noticed that we tend to drop back as well. And we could look at that dropping back as a negative. Why did I screw up? Why did I binge eat again or whatever? And I've learned that it's all part of the process of climbing the mountain. It's all part of the climb. And that the brain uses all of that information to help us then go to the next level of our mountain. So that's the first concept. The second one is the fact that if we really want to climb our mountain and find joy in climbing and fulfillment, and I think that's the key, Pat, is we can climb and we can climb all day long. We can be climbers, but if we're not finding fulfillment, joy, and peace in the process, then why are we climbing?
And I would argue that's not climbing.
Great. I'd love to hear that. What you would call that then?
I would call that being in the trenches, doing the same thing day after day without questioning it and being miserable along the way.
Okay. So whether we're climbing,
I think there's joy inherent in climbing.
yeah, that's there is. So maybe it's more our activity. If what we do throughout the day isn't bringing joy, peace, that type of thing, then that's not fun. So, but what I've learned in this process is that if we can learn how to climb in millimeters, and in the millimeters, we can learn how to access our imagination for creativity and gain inspired ideas about the next millimeter step, then that gives us a lot of confidence, a lot of joy, and it certainly brings passion into the motivation into what we do. And without that passion, we end up working out of obligation. I have to do this. I must. We're in the digging trenches, as you call it. So, anyway, mediocre. Climb the mountain. I love how you brought up climbing the mountain. Climbers, campers, and quitters.
No, and I think you bring up something really important, and that is to find joy in the process, in the baby steps that take you along your path. Because the reality is you're always on the path. You never really climb a mountain. And so you have to find joy in each of those steps. And when you can find that, I think that all of a sudden your life really turns around.
Certainly you feel a release of the pressure or the emotions associated with when you weren't. And it gives you more clarity.
Part of it, I think, is just being very present. I think learning to be present, which goes back to our meditation discussion, is a key piece of finding peace, if you will, in life. When you're very present, the past and the future don't exist. It's just here and now. And I think that's actually where creativity lives, in the moment.
Oh, that's right. It's the only place you can really create is in the moment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you have to inherently be present. And that brings all sorts of benefits with it. You're not being judgmental. You're not comparing. You're involved in what you're doing. And I would argue that speaks to living a very good, fulfilled life, moment
Absolutely.
by moment.
So how many people do you feel know how to at least enter into that space of being present?
I think it's a vast minority of people.
I agree. And we often say that, at least I hear this a lot, and I sometimes use it myself, is, well, we get distracted. And I believe that, but the question to me is, distracted by what?
Well, I think it goes down to personal control over your mind. You don't need to be distracted. You can stay focused. It's a learnable skill. It is a skill, but you can learn, anybody can learn it, but it takes practice, which is why they call it a meditation practice. You have to keep doing it. But as you do it, those skills build, and you can notice when you're distracted, excuse me, and choose another route, choose to be present.
Yeah. Well, that's self-development, right?
I think we should teach self-development in schools. Excuse me, a cough today. But I interviewed a woman who's actually putting together a curriculum focused on self-development for kids. And I thought that was a brilliant idea, because those tools will go with you for the rest of your life. They're valuable, always.
And as you talk with people who had those kind of mentors when they were growing up, no matter what environment they were coming from, but if they had a mentor to teach them those types of principles, and my goodness, they know how to deal with life, they know how to move forward, and they have a much deeper sense of confidence and peace. And I love that. I think it needs to start when they're 5-year-olds.
Yeah, I agree. If you could boil this whole conversation, which has ranged over a number of topics, down to like 3 actionable steps for people, what would you tell them?
Well, one of those would definitely be to become more observant of your emotions, of your thoughts, which I found journaling to be very helpful with that. Meditation. I don't know how a lot of people look at meditation, but I know in the past I looked at that's that's not for me. That's a habit of thinking. When you react to things like that, just be aware of it. So being able to observe your thoughts and your emotions and ask questions about it. Why is this happening? What's going on? How do I how do I how do I really want to show up right now? And I like using this little action, and with the people I work with, if you can identify 3 words that would accurately describe your best self and how you want to show up in that moment, seems to be very helpful. So observation, when you feel these emotions, you feel triggered in the sense of self-talk and you know what's going on, then being able to step back by, oh, I know what this is. And then why is this happening? What's the situation? Who am I dealing with? What's it trying to tell me? And what are 3 words that would best describe how I want to show up and get back present in the moment in what I should be doing at this point? And so that's one way. The second way, I think the second thing here is once again, is to journal. If you find yourself in a space where you seem to be triggered throughout the day, or you had some hard conversations during the day with a boss or an employee or a client, and you're dealing with those emotions, just to write out, what is it I'm feeling? Once again, that's another way to observe, is to do that. The third thing, which, relates to what I do, is if it's okay, but if anyone chooses that they would like to do this profile to get more clarity about the language around what's driving these emotions and these behaviors, etc., they're more than willing to do that. There's no cost to it. And so that might be another wonderful way that people can do that. But when it comes down to it, when we're talking about being a victim, and what can pull us into that space, it's in my experience, it's always been related to looking at some external thing, a person, a situation, a boss, a job, the environment of the job, or whatever. If you find yourself blaming external things for what's going on in your life or what's not going on, then that's a wonderful place to recognize that that once again, you go into observation and step out of that, recognizing that you are in control of your own self.
Thank you for listening. I hope you'll support this podcast by becoming a Bump 2 subscriber. Buy us a cup of coffee. It's your support that makes this podcast and website possible. I hope you found something in today's podcast that inspires you along your own life's path, because sometimes a bump in the road is actually a portal into a more conscious and meaningful life.